Aye.
Bob?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, we have a couple things to do. We have 3 or 4 warrant articles to go back and revisit. And we have the beginnings of discussion on our report to the town for the town meeting, which I, a little while ago, sent you a draft that I just finally got wrapped up first piece of it. And I hope you received an email on that.
Yes.
Okay.
I've not read it yet, to be honest with you.
No, that's fine. That's fine. We can, I didn't try to write up the whole thing. I only had time and worked on the first piece of it. So we can take a look at it as we go along and discuss the ideas of the topics. But first of all, we've got the leftover warrant articles to take a look at. And I think that if we look at article number 26 first, that may be the easiest. Article 26 is the article that that uses $52,000 to pay for a transit vehicle for the Public Buildings Department. And I found out a lot more information since our meeting on Thursday. This is not, it's not a car. This is a Ford F-350 minivan, or whatever the terminology they use for it. And it's big enough to haul a lot of fairly big things that they need to move between buildings. And I think for purposes of the public buildings thing, apparently one of their key things is that it's a covered vehicle. They only have an open trailer for carrying things. And they kept talking about how worried they were about the voting machines as an example of what happens if they get stuck trying to move things in the rain. So we ought to have some discussion, further discussion about it. Otherwise, I'll take a motion to approve it.
So, John, you know,
Yes.
I mean, I honestly, I don't understand the cost of $50,000. I mean, we approved $51,000 for a new cruiser, which has, you know, a lot more technology involved in it than a van. I mean, I buy vans all the time in the course of my work, and $50,000. And you said, I'm assuming it's a Ford Transit 350 van or 450 van, which is a 1.5 ton vehicle, not an F series, because that would be a pickup. So I'm assuming it's a transit van. But I don't know why we would need a 1.5 ton van, a 450 series, for the building and maintenance group. I mean, a regular transit, you know, 150 or 250 van is $24,000 to $30,000. We're talking about a 1.5 ton van, you know, with a dual rear axle. If we're talking about a 450 series, I don't quite understand the need for that. I don't know what they move that's that big that requires a 1.5 ton van.
I don't have any more specifics than the stuff that I gave out before. And I'm not versed myself in what the different models do. I was told it was a 350 model that could perhaps be
That's
incorrect.
a 1 ton. A 350 would be a 1 ton. As long as it's a transit, not an F. If it's an F, it's a pickup. So I mean, I don't know really what we're buying or what we're using it for. I mean, if we're moving around voting machines and, you know, records and things like that, you know, a 1/2 ton van, I'm sure is more than sufficient for that type of work. Unless this is going to be some kind of work van that we're going to be outfitting with, you know, racks and tools and things like that, that's going to have constant weight, then that's something different. I'm just not sure I understand the complete purpose of that big of a van.
I was told that the van can be fitted inside with shelves, so they can carry tools and things like that on a permanent basis. And it was described as a whole collection of things that they have to cart from building to building, such as cleaning equipment and so on. And beyond that, I don't really know more specifics.
One thing in what you've been saying has got me a little bit confused. I think, Rich, what you're saying is for 52 grand, it ought to be a 450 van.
$52,000 for $52,000. I mean, I don't know too many vans that cost $52,000. And we buy a lot of vans in my work. I mean, for $30,000, you could have a 1-ton van without. So the expense seems really high relative to what we're saying we need. So I don't know if that $50,000 is including outfitting it with racks and all kinds of stuff. It's very high relative to the cost of a van.
Okay, and the other half of that is that John said it was a 350. So obviously we've got a disconnect there. We got the price for a heavy price for a 450, but we say we only are getting a 350. So what explains the difference of 15 grand or 20 grand?
Yeah, it's a lot of money in my opinion for what we're talking about. And I guess for me to feel comfortable with it, you know, I just need to know what we're actually getting.
Let me go back. I have no problem going back, and I can get Jeremy to call me and find out as much details as I can. Would you feel comfortable in talking to Jeremy, Rich?
Yeah, I mean, if you can give Jeremy my cell and have him give me a call tomorrow, that's fine.
Okay, let me try to do that.
Okay.
And then you'll be able to get all the kind of specifics that you need to know about what size it is and what they're going to do for it, and what they're transporting back and forth. The only other piece I remember now, I was told that it's big enough that they can, if necessary, fit a snow plow onto it at the front. Yeah.
Okay. Well. All right. That's
F-Series then. F-Series,
yeah, I mean, is it 4-wheel drive on top of it? My God, what are we buying here? It's like a $115,000 lawnmower.
Maybe this is one of the ways the town is going to have to try to make additional income next year. They're going to maybe put it out into service for people to have their driveways plowed for a fee. So,
boy, I just want to understand more, John. That's all.
Right. No, I understand. Let me try to get in touch with Jeremy and and I'll give him your cell phone number and ask him to give you a call.
Yeah, tomorrow would be best.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Another warrant article is Article 14, and the article reads is to raise money for $14,000 for the purpose of funding the purchase of storage containers or take any other action in regard thereto. Now, on this one, I've talked to just different people, and it really all comes down to what this article really is an article for is turning the pavilion into a workspace. And they're fairly clear on their needs for a workspace. The records are in the basement of the library building now, which is basically Jeremy's office, and in the old pavilion, and they want to move them out. so they can create actual workspaces. What has happened is that after the split of maintenance back into two pieces, one for the town and one for the schools, the workspace that was used by everybody is over in the school workspace, and that's no longer available for the public public building services to do. And so
Why, John? Do we know why that's not available?
yeah, because it's the schools.
We're one town though, right?
You would think so, but apparently that's not the
Well,
case.
I deal with this in business all the time. You know, we have one department says that's my printer and another one says it's my printer. And we just say it's a printer that belongs to the company. When I see stuff like this and, you know, we're creating these silos of cost. So we have a school maintenance department and a buildings maintenance department, and one can't use the other's workshop or tools. They need their own workshop and tools. And all we're doing is kicking the can down the road and adding more expense. You know, we have records that need storage. You know, that's a whole other issue around the town bylaws, which thank you for researching, you know, but clearly that needs to change because there's plenty of legal ways to retain records electronically rather than paper. That's a different story. And I don't know who we bring that to research and find out what our options are. But this is one of those things that's just, it sounds to me like we got 3 kids at recess with one's got the ball and doesn't want anybody else to play with their ball. We have tools, we have equipment, we have space, and we're saying one can't use it. We're the same town.
Well, I just don't think that people think that that's the case. That because the schools are sort of specialized, and I think the experiment that they tried for the last few years to create one department to work on all the maintenance has just not worked. I certainly don't want to inadvertently open those wounds again. And so I think that it's not unreasonable to say that the public services department, I mean, they're really in one sense more closely related to the highway department than they are to the other to the school service department.
Which is fine in that sense. You know, we have a large highway garage that's full of tools and equipment and things needed too. What we're talking about is creating another cost structure that's going to need tools, and it's going to need a replacement van, and it's going to need, you know, additional expenses that are now associated with operating it. And all we've done is create another cost structure that when we have, you know, shared services, maybe it's not the school, maybe there's just, you know, not good blood there or whatever. And, you know, I don't want to open any wounds either, but we have a beautiful new highway building, you know, maybe it's 15 years old now, 20, but with a lot of space, plenty of equipment in it, where things could be worked on easily. I look at that and I say, why would be creating another cost structure that we're going to continually have to support and fund with? You all know, we've been on one of these meetings, we're going to get a request, well, we need, you know, $3,500 for a welder, or we need this. Well, don't we have one already somewhere in the town? Well, yeah, we do, but it belongs to the highway garage and we can't use it. Well, we're one town. I don't like creating different cost structures that we don't need. It's just how I feel about it. But I look at, you know, spending $14,000 on, you know, 2 containers to put records in so that we can create a workshop, because people can't, you know, find a way to operate under one roof together. Wasteful. What's worse is we're going to make a forward-looking statement as part of this budget, as we talked about in our last meeting, saying that there's risk to future state funding that says because of the reduction in state aid to the towns because of the coronavirus outbreak, and we're creating another cost structure during that time. I look at that and I go, are we being fiscally responsible in doing that?
Well, it seems to me that we're only spending we're only being asked to spend $14,000 to move the records.
Today.
And that for this coming year, I don't see that there are requests for additional amounts of money, and they're going to have to do some kind of renovation. But I don't see that there are requests for big amounts of money to create a massive space.
Yeah, remember, last year, we got requests at Dufrane's because we need $5,000 because we're putting the electric underground or something, or, we need, there's always those little things that come up that come across our committees. And it's going to be those things. And so it's $14,000 for records to create a space. And next year there'll be something in the budget for additional needs relative to the maintenance, whether it's equipment-based or structure or something. And we've created another cost structure that's going to continue to take money from the town.
Actually, we created the cost structure a year ago. I think it was a year ago. Because we not only stopped the sharing stuff, but we also split up the mowing stuff out of the highway into the public buildings budget, which freed up personnel for the highway department. So someplace along the line, it was a decision made. The highway department can't handle mowing the grass, and apparently now can't handle having some work done in their garage by the public buildings guys. It would seem if you put everybody back into the highway department, they'd find a spot for them, I bet you.
I agree with you, Bob. I mean, to me, I don't remember being involved in, I traveled a lot last year, so maybe I missed that meeting where the structure was created that separated this out, and shame on me if I did, but I look at this as we have an expense, and this is going to be the gift that keeps on giving. It's $50,000 for a van this year and $14,000 for record storage. That's $64,000. Next year, it's going to be something. And the year after that, it's going to be something more. And next thing you know, we're going to have another department in the town that is a cost structure in this town when it could be easily housed. I don't mind the person responsible for it. I think that's fine. The oversight of the buildings that way, I'm okay with that. But we can't share a space and tools and equipment. I mean, we're one town. Nobody in that highway garage, nobody owns one piece of equipment in that building. Not the director, not a mechanic, nobody. Those things belong to the town and the people of Granby. And we have a responsibility to say, look, guys, figure it out.
I think you could go back to Chris and ask him why the highway department can't provide the space, John?
Yeah, sure. One thing I think we might want to keep in mind is that years ago we had a highway department that had about 10 full-time employees, I think. And when we started cutting budgets years ago, we just cut that way back and way back and way back. So they finally had to start hiring more outside contractors for doing some things. And that was before we got hit with a lot of these state mandates, unfunded mandates for things such as the sewer, the stormwater drain project. That they're using the highway department personnel for lots of things which didn't exist years ago. And we have not objected to the increase in personnel over there. And then basically the split is equivalent to like an increase in personnel because of the additional sort of works which the town is demanded to do. This is it's a different but related issue to the question of whether there's space. I'll ask the question about space, but I think the question about the personnel that are needed is a different issue.
I don't have an issue with the personnel personally. I understand the highway department from, our past meetings has expanded duties relative to, the storm drain system and things like that. I'm not complaining about that. I said earlier, I'm not opposed to a person being responsible for the buildings, the town buildings and maintenance thereof. And I'm not opposed to that. What I'm opposed to is creating a cost structure with additional space that's going to require us to continue to fund that space in one way or another through capital expenses around equipment. We're talking about buying depreciating assets in storage containers. I mean, storage containers, guys, the metal boxes, $14,000 worth for a couple metal boxes. That next year, are we going to need another metal box? And the year after that, because we haven't solved the storage issue with the records. And we have a big highway garage. So I don't know who says to the highway garage, make space for them because they need space to work, and that will be their space. And we have equipment there that needs to be shared. I don't know who says that to the people, but that's what should be done.
Okay, I got a couple of questions for them. Let me ask. There may
Thank
be,
you.
yeah, no, there may be reasons, obviously, for them requesting this. Convenience might be one of the reasons. I don't know, but let me inquire. The question of the containers, as I said, it seems to be a byproduct of this, although from having been in the basement of the library, the thing is jammed full of records right now. It's probably not a quick project to figure out what to do with that because of all the various town laws that have to be changed and to match up, and you have to worry about what the state requires for a lot of these different operations for retention of records.
I would rather see us rent space in the old highway garage. The first bay is open, last I saw, and for rent, and put them in there for, $500 a month, and then buy a depreciating asset like two storage containers that sit someplace. And guys, we all know what happens in storage containers. I mean, they leak. I ship stuff all over the world all the time. They leak. Things get wet. You get mice in there. We're not talking about, secure storage at a heated facility. Right now, they're in a heated facility where the records are retained. We're going to put them in boxes outside somewhere and hope they stay good. It seems ill-conceived in my mind. What's with the old police station? Do we own that?
No, that belongs to the state.
Okay.
We rented it, or rented it. I think basically they rented it for a nominal fee, right? But we rented it for years and years. But the state actually owns that building.
Maybe we could rent it for a nominal fee for a little while longer for record retention.
It may be in the same shape as the records.
Might be. I have a hard time spending money on two metal boxes. That's how I feel.
Right, I understand.
John, when you're asking the questions, ask why the public buildings can't be taken care of by the highway department. Why does it have to be a separate department, separate supervisor?
How many people are employed by the public buildings department, John? Do we know?
I want to say 4, but I think that's 2 full-time and 2 part-time, or 1 full-time and 3 part-time. It's not 4 full-time. For example, I think some of the people who do some of the people who do the mowing, I think, are part-time. Part-time in the sense that they wouldn't work full year round. But we don't have, I don't have the list of employees and how they fit on the salary scale this year. Unless that, I don't think that was contained in the original documents that we had. I can check that. Just a second.
Bob asked a very good, relevant question. You know, I mean, obviously the cost associated with the department is usually in the management of the department, but now we're talking about, you know, cost plus. So, you know, I'm not opposed to the department if they can figure out how to share maintenance facilities. I'm not opposed. But if we're talking about, you know, we're developing a whole new cost structure that maybe started a year ago or more, I don't think we have the money for it.
I understand. I think, and particularly for us after what we've been looking at, the question is not whether we have the money for fiscal year 21, it's whether we have the money for fiscal years 22 and on.
And 23 and 24 from what we were
Right.
talking about, you know, last time.
Successive years after fiscal year 22.
Yep.
That if there's going to have to be, cuts made, you got to look very hard at everything done on the town side as well as school side.
Well, we know we would never want to touch public safety. You never want to touch police, fire, ambulance, right? Those are the things that I think we have a responsibility to everybody in this town to make sure that we are funding properly to support the public safety of this town. You know, highway next, because we have to maintain roads and, you know, make the town drivable and all those things, right? But when we talk about, you know, mowing and we talk about, you know, some of these other things, yes, in normal times, we want those things. We want our buildings to look great. We want our grounds to be nice, but we're not dealing with normal times right now.
All right, let me find out the answer to those questions. Okay, should we move on?
Sure. You really need to talk about the mower?
Yeah, we do.
All right.
We do. I spent a long time today talking to Chris and to Jeremy. Here's the situation. We've had this mower, which is apparently one brand, I think a Jacobson brand, which has been breaking down regularly, and it's not of the same quality mower as the Toro, which they want to buy. They've had a lot of advice, I think, from the chief mechanic there in the Public Services Department. The thing that they're buying, a Toro, is it's slightly bigger. The current one has a 14-foot wide mowing capacity. This one has a 16-foot wide mowing capacity, and they both have the feature that they have central piece and two wings, and the two wings can be folded up independently of each other or at the same time. And that's important because the places that they mow, you either have to have that kind of capability so you can create a small mower for some pieces, or else you have to bring in a second mower. It's what they call the zero-turn mower in order to be able to get to the areas that they have to cut. And that's one of the reasons why they prefer this kind of mower to the tack-on tow-behind mowers that you put behind a tractor. Those are all of a size that there are areas that they tried to use those so that it wouldn't work. and then they would be forced to have a second mower brought in. They're talking about using 2 trailers, two people just to move the equipment around. So it creates a real mess. The new mower has a bigger engine capacity. And right now, apparently, with the current mower, if you're a couple hours, the thing will start overheating, and you have to actually stop and cool the thing off. And it has another thing that breaks. Right now, it's in the shop because an axle is broken. But another problem they've had is that the mechanism that runs the mowers itself apparently breaks periodically. This whole brand apparently has not been good for them. It's why they want to get rid of it. The time factor, as I said, would increase a lot from this combination of having to move 2 separate pieces of equipment. It makes 3 separate pieces of equipment: the tractor, the mower, and then a second mower of a different nature from place to place as they did the mowing. Right now, maybe every other week they have to use a second mower for some pieces, but usually they were able just to use the one mower. The high school uses only one large mower. The school department mows smaller amounts for themselves with their own mower. Another piece of this, Bob, this comes from a question you asked that I checked on, is that the reason that the schools have been charged the same amount of money for the last umpteen years is that there has not been an actual tracking of the actual hours used to mow for the schools. That's changed this year. This year they're tracking everything exactly as to what they mow for. And so, and along with that, there's the possibility that Chris is going to be checking FEMA for the official rates for renting various equipment. That we have no mechanism right now to charge for the equipment, which includes the replacement cost of the equipment for anybody that uses the mower. So they have no option except just to keep it the same figure that's been charged all along, which is basically an estimate of the time. Starting next year, they're going to have actual cost figures for the time of the individuals, and they're going to have actual cost figures for the physical equipment use. And they hope to be able to use that and modify the figure for town spending on schools. So that'll happen no matter what, whether we get a new mower or whether we force them to do something else. But at any rate, I said it's not as simple as just switching to the smaller motors that travel behind tractors, because that will not give them the capacity to do the areas that they need to do. It won't fit in some areas. So that's the basically the additional information that I talked to a long time. And this is what I remember is that in 2012, the same question came up as the last time they bought the mower. Finance committee spent a lot of time, and I had them talk to the whole committee, which we find it hard to do this year. And I changed my mind after listening to them. And that's sort of my situation right now. I believe that this is probably a better deal for us all around. And particularly since we're trying to be very cautious about adding manpower anyplace. I'm not convinced that this isn't reasonable, but it does cost $115,000, and there are cheaper options that just would make them change their work patterns. So that's where that one stands as far as I got today.
Well, yeah, I mean, I appreciate the information, and I just, while you were giving us the information, did some Google searches on the mower, and there's plenty of them available on the market, with 2 years old, with 1,000 hours on them, which is minimal on something like that, for $34,000. Now, I don't know if we're in the market to buy, something that's 2 years or 3 years old for $34,000 instead of $115,000 that someone else has taken the depreciation on already. But there's, I understand the need for cutting and the width and the areas they're getting in. I'm a lawn guy, so I love lawn equipment, but I think there's more economical options than buying a brand new one for $115,000. If they were only given $50,000 to purchase this mower, I'm certain that they would find a lovely used one, with low hours on it. I'm looking at one now for under $50,000.
I don't know if they've ever asked whether they've ever considered buying a used piece of equipment. I know, except for in the past, as equipment has been made available by Westover Air Force Base, they've gotten a lot of. I think they've gotten things from Westover in the past, but I don't know if it's been part of their procedures to look at the possibilities of looking at and evaluating used equipment, factoring all the things about the use and the time that you want to keep it and so on. But that is another question I can ask.
Yeah, I'm looking at a 2018 Toro 5900 Series 5910D rotary mower, 16-foot wide, 4.88 meter cutting width. Cuts 20 acres and 20 acres an hour or something like that. Some ridiculous amount with the wings that go up and down. It's exactly what you're talking about, the 5900 series, and they range between 23,000 for one with 4,000 or 5,000 hours on it, up to 48,000 for one with less than 1,000 total hours on it. Geez, that seems like happy to get you the Cadillac of equipment, but which that is. But if we can do it at a more favorable price, that's comes from a reputable dealer. I'm looking at Cole Tractor Supply, and they'll ship it from Mississippi here for that price. I think there's ways to get what they want, but be more frugal about doing it.
All right. Let me bring that question up.
Let me put a couple of cents worth in. There's got to be somebody like John Deere or Kubota who put out some sort of a similar piece of equipment, I would think, and probably a number of other companies. So maybe we just looked and found the top of the line because it was nice and convenient on the state bid list. So that's where we got our numbers from. And we never really did any shopping to see if we could make do with something less, because I can't believe, regardless of whether the piece we have now was originally a piece of junk or not, it's hard to go from 52,000 brand new and say that we can double the price and a little bit more just in the basis of quality and 8 years worth of depreciation or inflation, 2 or 3% a year. There's a lot of money in there that seems like maybe we're buying a Cadillac and before we only had a Buick.
I like Buick.
Okay, let me bring that up. I suggest that we remembered this conversation because as we know that we have nothing but a recommendation to the select board and then eventually to the town on these warrant articles. So that in the event that the select board goes ahead and approves it at this amount, then we'll need to say something at time of town meeting as to what our recommendation is to this if it varies from what is on the warrant article. So Then we can let the let the debate take place in the July outside meeting.
More than happy to make statements on that one, John.
I know. Okay.
The
So
difficulty, I
John,
think, is.
Bob, I'm going to use your Cadillac Buick comment, by the way.
Well, you know, if, my thought would be if they can't furnish us with the information, we can move to postpone the article, or, well, we can't postpone it because we didn't write it, but we could do to turn it down or ask them to withdraw, because the fact of the matter is, they're getting along. This was a request they made back first of the year. They managed to keep the grass mowed now. And it's going to be a couple of months before we get the thing in. So the mowing season will be practically over at that point in time. So waiting is not going to really seem to do any harm to them.
yeah, except that it is working right now. It's got a broken axle. But you
Well,
know what? One
We
thing,
not had a town meeting.
huh?
They better have a backup plan, because buying a brand new piece of equipment because you got a broken axle doesn't seem to be my idea of the right way to go.
I don't know whether their intention was to buy it for this mowing season, or whether, like a lot of stuff we approve now, they're going to buy it for next spring.
Yeah.
But one thing I think that we can ask everybody to keep in mind is that putting it off doesn't necessarily mean it has to go longer than what we are sure will be required second town meeting this year. You know, more research can be done in the near future, very near future, and the thing could be brought back at the second town meeting if they want to. If the question is, do they want it for next mowing season, then they can do the research and we can bring it up in 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, whatever it is, that second town meeting will take place. So I don't think if you're not really thinking about buying it at your local Home Depot for this mowing season, it really doesn't make any difference whether it's decided on July 25th or later in the season.
I agree.
Fair enough.
Okay. All right, and that's what we had left over on the articles in the budget. Want to switch and talk about the reports of the town?
Sure.
Okay, if you got your document there, I'll take, we can start going through a little bit to basically just to get the ideas down more than anything else. I'll have time as successive days go on to try to sharpen up some of the ideas and the language in this. At the top of the first page, I've got for top half first page, those were just in very broad terms, some of the ideas that we might want to think about including in it. And more I thought about it, the sort of traditional report that we write isn't really going to work this year. For one thing, we know that we're going to need a second town meeting anyway, so that we might as well get people prepared to be thinking in an entirely different way about what our possibilities are for the next couple of years. So the whole set of problems that are caused by the pandemic, I think we maybe want to try to get across the idea that yes, the pandemic may go away, but it's not going to be 1 year. And yes, we may recover financially for it, but it's also not going to be 1 year. This is the effects of this thing are going to last for quite a while. And so I think it's worthwhile to detail exactly how big these effects are. And we use that, and that's what I started trying to write up. And we can use that as a way to get into, first of all, telling the town that we are in fact almost certainly going to need a second town meeting because we'll at some point find out what the state has to offer us for state aid. And also then use that as a way to talk about what some of the possibilities are for things that might happen next year, including the direst of the scenarios, and to also then perhaps talking about coming back over 2 or 3 years to bring state aid back up to the level it was. We would have to, I think, include some information as to if we're that much worried about this, and if in fact, for example, the 1.3 million that the state is not giving us this year is not going to come back. It's lost money. Why are we spending all the money that we're recommending in the budget? And I think we have to talk about that and explain that. And that'll be an explanation based upon the use of stabilization funds and what they're designed for and what they can be used for, and whether or not this is in fact an appropriate rainy day. Although the rain is most likely going to last more than one day, and we are in fact going to have some difficult situations to deal with in the following year. And Bob, you suggested that we make it clear that the fact that we have the money to backstop everything this year, it's not certain at all that we're going to have that money to backstop it in future years. And it's certainly not certain that anybody who's putting together a budget in the future is going to be recommending that, for example, the large budgets, if net school spending does in fact get cut, that we are not going to have the wherewithal to continue to fund at high levels. So that's something that should be able to lay out in a fairly clear fashion what the town ought to be thinking about to protect Granby's financial future. So
I think the way you lay it out, John, and starting out, with the assumption that, from credible sources, there's future impact, has to be well explained and to the people of the town. Because, we are questioning at least, certain things this year as we take a forward look to what we may encounter in years to come. Bob raised a great point earlier in our conversation around 2 departments, highway and buildings versus 1. There's things that we have to be thinking about and that we are thinking about. So, as I think about, if I was sitting on the town meeting floor saying, well, if this is true, why are we appropriating money for this, that, or the other thing? Those questions will come up, and we have to be prepared to answer those.
Yeah, I was explaining to my wife what all the time was going into this year, and brought up just that point, that every time we've talked about the budget and every time we've talked about the pandemic, we ask ourselves the same question over and over again. Are we really certain we ought to be spending $1.5 million of free cash to prop things up for a year? And it is a very, very difficult kind of process to work through, or has been for us to work through, to come to the conclusion that, yes, it probably makes sense, but you got to understand that this is a one-year effort. Things have to at least partially come back by next year, or we're in big trouble.
What are our options, though, John? I mean, we're really appropriating $1,087,000 of it, simply, to prop up the schools because of the net school spending, and not understanding or knowing. I'm sorry, understanding is the wrong word there. Knowing whether or not, right, the spending amounts are going to be reduced by the state in accordance with the reductions in aid of 20%. We don't know that, but so right now we're making an assumption that, we have to appropriate this money because we don't know if the school spending is going to be reduced by the state in terms of what's required. So we're making kind of a good faith effort to say, hey, look, we're going to support education on this, and meet the state requirements in spite of the shortfalls. What are our options rather than taking it out of the free cash?
Well, there is still some money in the general purpose stabilization fund. But that's just basically equivalent of using cash, but requiring a 2/3 vote instead of the 50% vote that's required for free cash. And in other words, any other sources of income that we used would free up free cash. What would we do with the free cash? Well, we put it into stabilization funds. There really isn't much other choice. What we've looked at in the past is this, and without specific numbers going to it. After the severe cuts we made in the budget a number of years ago, after we no longer had the $1 to $2 million coming in every year from the landfill, we really got down to basics. There's a lot of stuff that you have to do either yourself or hire somebody to do, hire an outside service to do, which would wind up costing you more money just by virtue of being a town. And as it turns out, you don't have to do, for example, you brought up a good example with public safety. You don't need a fire department. But if you don't need a fire department, there are a couple things that are going to happen. One is that your property insurance is going to go up so high that you'll discover they'll be in fact cheaper to have a fire department than to not have a fire department. The second thing is to actually get any fire help. I don't know what you would do. Right now we're in a mutual aid situation with local communities. If you have no mutuality to offer for that, I don't know how you go about borrowing, or paying for fire services. So that's a real problem. The second problem is that the other big budget in town is the police force. And technically, you do not have to have a police force. You can have the state police force come through with a car approximately every 2 to 4 hours, we were told, to check on the town. Well, that basically gives up police protection. But it's one of the things which technically is not required. But the things that are not required are few and far between. You have a example I like to use was that, gee, wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have people going around assessing housing values and setting tax rates? Well, no, you need to have that. That's required. You need to have a clerk. You need to have a treasurer. We're not paying excessive salaries. If we had a slightly different structure and had a lot of those offices combined under the town auspices instead of a special elected officials, you might save a couple of bucks, but it's not anywhere near what we need. Highway department has become basically an arm of the state mandates. You could let your roads go to pot, but again, the individuals in town would collectively pay more for car repairs if you're driving over the roads that were not maintained for years than you're paying collectively as a town. Same thing with the trash service. Our trash for next year is what, $400,000 in the budget?
Yeah, 457. Yeah, 457.
Yeah. All right, and you're not required to have that, and yet we know from looking at things in the past is that if you don't have that, you're not going to stop generating trash. You're going to have people pay individually to have trash picked up, or you're going to have all this open space in Granby basically become a dumping grounds for trash. And I think that even on the basis of what individuals pay, although it's split up differently, collectively, it's cheaper to have a town trash pickup than it is to let people go off and purchase their own trash services. So it's a lot of no-win choices and a lot of choices which really are they're illusionary choices. So
yeah, I understand that, and thank you. I mean, and I don't think those are choices any of us would want to make between a fire department or a police department. Those are things that, like I said earlier, I see as, though they're not required, to your point, John, those are things that add value to people's homes in town and add value to the town, as well as schools do. So
Right.
when we think about those things, there's not a lot for us to do other than be, really physically, cautious on any spend outside what's needed. And I'm just using this as an example. I'm not picking on anybody, but we're talking about, 115 plus 50, you're 165 plus 14, you're, $179,000, in costs associated with the, building maintenance department that once was part of the highway department, never mind salaries or fringe associated with the salaries in terms of vacation and benefits and things like that. So we're probably at $300,000 when you take those things into account. And that's something we don't have to have. And if it went away tomorrow, I don't think anybody in the town would notice, to be honest. But if the police department was gone, certainly people would notice. So when I think about us making good fiscal choices as a group, these are the things we have to be thoughtful of. Now, do we need a new police car? I don't know. Could we got another year out of it? Maybe. I don't know. I didn't know enough or ask enough on that topic, but I certainly want a police car that's safe, gets the officers to and from the response safe, and responds quickly to emergency situations. So to me, that feels important, right? So as we think about all these things that are coming up to us now, there's going to have to be hard choices.
Yeah, and it comes down, we have two separate operations. We got the town operations, and for that I'm lumping in all the offices, all the departments, including police and fire, that report to the select board, together with the other independently elected officials in town. And then you got the schools. And the schools are about 2/3 of the spending. The questions around the town are as you described, and there's some things that are right at the top of the list that would have to be examined and decided whether or not, with the way we're doing it now, is the way that you would do it if you start running out of money. And then for the schools have their own backstop of a required minimum net school spending, which, thanks to a mistake made years ago, is actually for Granby about $450,000 more than it would be if just the state law were followed. And they're going to have to be willing to ask, all right, should we offer a course that only one student attends? Should we offer all these electives that go beyond what core curriculum is? Should we be having class sizes that are smaller than what is allowed by the state? If the town has to get down to the minimum net school spending, those questions they're going to have to ask. If the town wants to vote to allow them to do more than that, then the town has got to decide what things to cut out of the other services offered by the city government. So it is going to be next year, the fiscal year 22. There are going to be start of some very, very difficult questions asked that I don't know the easy answers to. So.
And I completely agree, John. When we think about, those items you brought up with the schools, again, we're talking about nice to haves versus need to haves.
Right.
And, in business, we deal with this all the time, right? Hey, when things are good, margins are strong, sales are good, there's things that we do that we wouldn't do in normal times or in bad times. And then in the bad times is when we tighten our belts, we batten down the hatches, and, we say we burn the furniture for heat, basically. And those are the things that are going to come up. But the one thing that, as a group, we have to be so cautious of, and it's something that's just endemic in this town, is, the us versus them, the schools versus the town. And we got to be so careful that the schools have a responsibility there too, right?
Absolutely.
you
Absolutely.
did a fantastic job navigating all the requests we had for information regarding the school budget, and the time that it took to get a lot of the information that we needed. You did a fantastic job, and we're very patient in that process. But as we look forward to 2021 and 2022 and beyond, there's going to have to be a far more collaborative effort here, because we need police and fire. In my opinion, as a homeowner in town, we need police and fire, and we need a highway department that keeps our roads in reasonable shape, so that our community is attractive to people, right? And we need schools that are providing a solid education for our students in town, and providing them with what they need. In times where we have more money and more flush and things are better, certainly we can have expanded things that are offered to our students. But when things are tight, you don't have certain things, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, eventually money runs out.
Yeah,
that happens. That happens.
trust me. We have shareholders all the time who tell us you don't have any more money.
Yeah.
Rich, back to your original question was should we be funding the shortfall this year, or should we be tightening our belt right now? I think it would be difficult for any of the department heads, the people employing the town employees, to say, well, I'm going to lay two people off on the basis that we don't know how much revenue we're getting in, so therefore we'll assume that we aren't getting any. See you around, guys or gals. And I think what we're probably doing is buying time with a full realization that we could have a real serious problem a year from now. A problem that
I agree
is
with you,
magnified by not doing any of it this year. And I don't really know what went on. I know the schools did not give notices to teachers that they would be laid off. So I guess you'd say, were boxed in as to what they could do if they had to cut the budget, or cut from, I use my terminology, cut from the budget they proposed back in March, which is some of the things they cut are things they intended to add. So I don't know if that's really wouldn't fall under my definition of cutting, but and as a result, it was very easy in preparing a budget for general government to eliminate the capital items, and rather than transferring $800,000 into reserves, just say, okay, we won't have to lay off any employees. We can make do. Now, I don't know if those concepts were behind the budget at all, but whatever it is, that's the result. Nobody is laid off in the town of Granby, even though we're taking a 20% hit in revenue. And that's sort of hard to just fathom.
Well, and how do we get up there, as a finance committee group, and explain that, hey, and quite honestly, guys, and it's no disrespect to us as a group, but the state has put us in a bad situation by not telling us if there's a net school spending change. There's no forward-looking forecast relative to 2021, 22, funding. So we don't know what we should or shouldn't do. Now, right. In those times, you'd say, well, I better do something, because when in doubt, do something, right? So I think by saying, look, you know what, we could get by without a mower. We could get by without doing this or that, or, and that's just an example. Again, I'm not picking on that department, but we're taking some fiscally responsible actions to preserve, the funding of the funds of this town. Now, next year's budget is going to be a horror show if this continues. To your point, John, is there's going to have to be significant cuts in the school budget. There's going to have to be significant reductions in the town budget. And to the extent we can get ahead of that now on the town side, because that's the only thing we really have left control over at this point, and even though they're small things, I think we have a responsibility to do so.
What I think is sort of going on, John, you would remember this a few years ago, Rich, just before you were on the committee. The schools needed more money. And the solution was going to be that we're going to have a millionaire's tax, and it was going to come out in Chapter 78. And then the millionaire's tax got kicked out by the state Supreme Court. I think what the legislature is doing is hoping that the federal government is going to come along and bail the state out. And that's why they don't want to get around to the hard stuff of figuring out what the budget's going to be.
Interesting idea. The the federal government, I don't know if they're going to try to backstop the states. The split between Democrats and Republicans is such that they'll always find a way to figure that the other side benefits more and vote against it. They won't get a unification on it. No, I understand that and heard that idea that it could be that the state just is expecting somebody else to do it for them too, and then wait till the last minute to decide there's nobody going to help. You got to do it yourself. Yeah.
We're in a tough spot, guys. This is, and I've only been on the committee for a short time, but to me, these are, unprecedented times, in terms of what to expect in the long haul. Even 9/11, the economy recovered essentially, in a year. Certainly there's been other things, with the landfill going away and things like that in the town, but these are really unprecedented times because nobody has the crystal ball to say, hey, are things going to be better by 23, 24, 25? None of us have that view.
Yeah, and I was hoping to convey some of that flavor in the beginning of the report, right at the very beginning of the report. Didn't I resisted the temptation to say, are we trying to scare everybody? Because in some sense we are. That this is not a situation to be taken lightly. Things may work out over the next 3 or 4 years. Things are not going to work out next year. Should we be afraid? Well, we should be very cautious, if not afraid. If you can turn to the actual first part of the report that I wrote up, I'd appreciate it if you would take a look at it and offer any kind of comments that you have on how I've written it up and what I've said.
How much is the first part?
Well, the section that says report, there is a little more than a page worth of writing.
All right, the whole thing. Okay.
Yeah, the whole thing there. And this is the first part of our report, but it lays its background.
I'm getting there. Hold on. I'm a little trouble
Sure.
navigating. Bear with me a second.
Sure.
Oh, bear with me.
I've got a little bit of a problem with.
Which one are you looking at? I'm sorry, John. Your emails.
Let's see.
Last one that came in like 5:30 or something like that.
Yeah, it just came in about.
Annual town report, the one that starts out with 2019 annual town report.
Yeah, topics, annual report topics. I sent it about 5:30 or 5:25.
Let me just take a look. I'm sure I have it. It's just sort of Kathy recommended proposal warrant articles, town report, Kathy annual report. I don't think I see that one, John.
Hold on just a second. Let me.
Hold on. Report ideas I've got.
Yes.
Yeah. Report ideas. Okay.
Okay.
Yep, I got you.
Okay, now halfway down the first page is bolded the word report, and it starts off, when a person or committee is charged with the responsibility of developing a fiscal year budget for a town. and take it from there.
I think I would change it could get worse to as it will likely get worse. Because I think we have enough information from credible sources that tells us that.
Where are we? Where is this?
I'm reading your paragraphs.
Yeah, which one?
I'm 1, 2, 3, 4th from the bottom. It says one other thing. It could get worse.
Oh, that was just a lead up to the 9C cuts.
Okay.
It's actually, it could get worse during this coming fiscal year.
Right. Okay.
Maybe I should make that. Also,
Yeah.
I've cleaned up a little bit of language on a few places up above to make my quick writing make a little more sense a few places. But on that one, that you have to go all the way down to read to the 9C cuts. It tells people that even when we finish with whatever it is we do, however many town meetings it makes. I don't think I've mentioned the second town meeting yet. It's no guarantee that this year is going to be okay, because they were apparently told in that conference call with Senator Lesser that they have to be prepared that there could be these 9C cuts coming later in fiscal year 2021.
Well, if the state makes an assumption on what the revenue is going to be, and we then go ahead and assume that it's coming in, and in fact they don't collect the revenue, they've got a problem.
Yeah,
And they don't have much time to do it, so that's when they get around to the 9C stuff.
right.
Cut us out, and that leaves us. I don't know where it would leave us technically, but one thing's for sure, we would have a hole for whatever they turn out not to give us.
Yeah, what they're required by law to do is to balance the budget so that the income is the same as the appropriations, and they have a choice of things that they can do. The easiest one is to cut. They have a choice of using the rainy day fund. They have a choice of raising revenues. The analogy for us as a town is that we can cut expenses. We can dip into stabilization funds, which is our rainy day fund, and we can raise revenue. The difficulty is that raising revenue in a town means passing a tax increase, and you can't do that in the springtime for the current fiscal year. There will still be a little bit of money left in stabilization funds, and there may be free cash available by the spring. But our choices are really not great. We'll still have to have a balanced budget, and we'll still have the appropriations.
I don't know about that, John, 100%. Because the state can come along and say and the amount of unanticipated aid that you didn't receive can be used as a carry forward to next year as a deficit.
They
So
can allow you to do that?
I think they could allow you to do that. That only puts the problem off, however,
Pushes it
I
off.
mean, it doesn't change. And
Right.
at the end of the next fiscal year, it's the same one way or the other.
Yeah.
But it would eliminate having to deal with it financially in the spring.
Yeah, all we're doing is kicking the can, though. I mean, and that does nobody any good to kick the can, right? I mean, yeah, it might be a feel good for a moment, so people don't have to deal with it, but you still got to deal with it.
Well, we'd have to deal with it, but whether you transfer money out of your reserve fund or don't transfer it out, if you've got a deficit, you've got to take care of that first the following year. So in reality, it's gone at that point in time. And if you,
Yeah,
if
you
this,
have to reserve for it. You have to, if you have a deficit the following year, you have to have a reserve for that deficit because you have to pay it.
yeah, but so the state would tell you any deficit that you have has to be taken care of first in your budget for the following year. But if the cut comes in April or May, there's really no way in the world you're going to be able to cut any sizable amount of money in the remaining couple of months of the fiscal year.
All right. You have to, Rich, you have to have a balanced budget before the state will approve your tax rate. So, and if they say that the first thing you have to do is make up deficits, and that's part of what your budget will be. So they look at all of that and decide that you do or do not have a balanced budget, and that they are then able to allow you to set a tax rate for the town. So,
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
What would worry me sort of in general is that when the people in Boston start drafting a budget, they always tend to be a little more optimistic about revenue than they need to be or should be. And if there's any thought that the federal government is going to bail them out, their income estimate will be on the high side because the money will be coming in from the government. So therefore, they'll tell us something and no way in hell we're ever going to get it.
My favorite story on that is that years ago I went to an MMA meeting in January in Boston, and the process for that year was explained to everybody. They said that year the state had hired a number of independent economists to come together with the state economists, and the purpose was that they generate in their conversations and discussions a consensus as to what the state could expect for an increase in income for the following fiscal year. So they had this 2 or 3 day conference of all these people, and they came to a consensus fairly easily that the state should expect, I think it was something like a 3.5% increase in income. So the legislature thanked them, went back and built the budget with a 4% increase in income in it. So they did follow their processes. Okay.
One thing I had a question about, John, you made a statement. Let me see if I can find it here. The paragraph right above that. The internal contradictions. The school proposed budget assumes no cuts in Chapter 70 funds or school choice funds. Seems preposterous, yet here we are. To me, that implies that that's what the school did. And I don't think it is what they did. I think that's what they did after the town said, this is what we think we could approve. Because they did have a budget on the table where they were cutting out $450,000, $60,000, $70,000, which is what they were planning on proposing at their public hearing.
Well, my statement was based upon what current situation is, just like my statements about the town budget are based upon the current situation. Whatever intermediate steps were taken in their current budget, they're listing the amount that was in the governor's budget for Chapter 70 funds and also school choice funds. And also they're assuming, as we're not so much assuming it as ignoring any implications otherwise, that the net school spending is the same as it was last year, or as the same as it was proposed in the governor's budget.
Well, I would differ with you. I mean, because we're talking about somebody's intent. I mean, if the school had published and had out to the public a budget with $467,000 of cuts, it's pretty hard for us to say, but their budget doesn't reflect any cuts, because they didn't move, and we're quite pleasantly surprised, needless to say, when the town administrator's budget came out, or when they learned what it was. I have no problem whatsoever if you say something to the effect that it's sort of hard to believe that with all the cuts going on, the school budget increases by 1.2% or whatever it may be. Because there's no question but that their budget is more this year than it was last year.
Yeah, but part of that is that in their figures they've got the money, right? They couldn't. It wouldn't be present. I don't think they'd be presenting that proposed budget if they were required to think that there was going to be over $1 million or a shortfall in the state aid to education that goes to the schools. A combination of this Chapter 70 money and the school choice funds. I don't think that they would, any additional things that they added, I think they would have taken out of the budget, because I don't believe that it would thought to be reasonable to be forced to make up $1 million and a shortfall in the budget.
I'm not following you, I don't think.
Well, if we take a look at both the town budget and the school budget, there are perhaps things which have been cut out of the, certainly in the town budget, there have been things which have been cut out than from what was originally proposed, including, for example, though you may not think of savings as an expenditure, there was a plan to put about $800,000 into stabilization funds.
I don't consider that.
Yeah, you don't consider that, but nevertheless.
As far as I'm concerned, the only thing that was taken out of the school budget that was proposed back in March was $260,000 for a police telephone system or radio system. That's the only, everything else is still right in there. And, you know, to my way of thinking, how convenient it is to put a budget together, and all you got to do is say, wait a year to on the radio system, chief.
Well,
everything else.
Yeah, but we're going to have to address that. I mean, we talked about that a little bit earlier, you know, and for us too, it's not just the schools. I mean, we're kind of flying blind here, right? They have a net school spending requirement, right? That as a town, we have to spend so much on our schools, right?
Right.
But our aid is cut. But they haven't told us if they've cut the net school spending requirement. So,
right.
Yes, I mean, to be fiscally responsible, should the school be thinking, well, we should think about some cuts now? Yeah, well, but they're saying like, look, I don't have to, so I'm not, right? Well, that's us as a finance committee having to take a different tack. Next year, there's going to be no choice. If the funding stays at -10, -15, -20%, there has to be cuts, or else we're talking about, you know, getting rid of certain town services, right? And there's no way if that ever came to any meeting, that would create an us versus them like you've never seen, right? And we don't want that to happen. So, I mean, I know the schools do not report into the finance committee. I understand that. But they also are going to have to understand that if they want to appear fiscally responsible in the state of in the face of the cuts, they're going to have to make hard decisions like everybody else.
And let me ask you a question. What would your thinking be if, let's say we do have a 20% cut in Chapter 78 and 20% in everything else? And net school spending is now down by whatever the amount of money it is. How much would you recommend for a school budget? What we have right now, or would you say cut it back by $400,000?
I'd say you'd have to cut it by the same amount of the cut, Bob, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, but we didn't cut back any expenditures in town by $400,000. And we lost $1 million. We didn't cut $1 million of expenditures.
Not yet. I'm willing to bet next year we're faced with it though.
Next year, yes, and next year on the school, yes. But mine is if all of a sudden we knew that the numbers were 10% for both state and for both Chapter 70 and the general aid, would we say to the schools, okay, come along and cut now? Or would we say, okay, your budget is still what it is that we've approved? And
I have a different viewpoint, and I think let me bring it up in relationship to things like stabilization funds. I view money that we put into stabilization funds as an expenditure, and the reason is that I think of the stabilization funds as being a way to take care of emergencies, but also to even out what your expenditures in the future are going to be. If you put money regularly into stabilization funds, then you're going to be able in the future to have money to take out to spend on all the stuff that you have to do, capital equipment, operations in special times, other special circumstances that come up, without having to worry about it coming out of current year's finances. I'm influenced a lot by insurance background because that's basically one of the mechanisms of how insurance works. For a lot of kinds of insurance you buy, you're overpaying, if you will, in the beginning in order to have the funds later on to continue to pay for the services and benefits that you're getting. So if you don't want to do that, that's okay. Then you can go back to a pay-as-you-go system, which has finally, a few years back, been recognized across the states and the federal government as being a way to basically get out of paying pension benefits that you've approved for people on paper, but have no intention of paying because you're not funding them. Paying those things ahead of time is nothing more than creating a current expenditure for something you're going to need in the future, but doesn't change economically what's happening over the long run for anything. So what we're giving up right now by not putting $800,000 into the stabilization funds is that we are forcing future generations, even this generation, future years, to find a different way to pay for expenses that we know are going to come up. And that's the way I see it. So the town is giving up a lot. We're giving up $800,000.
Yeah, but let me carry that one step further. An arbitrary decision was made that let's say $500,000 or $600,000 of free cash was going to be used to fund capital projects. And we gave that up too, because a number of years ago, any free cash that wasn't necessary in the spring was all transferred to stabilization funds, not just what was arbitrarily determined. So I will agree that the $800,000 is an appropriation, but so is the additional $500,000 or $600,000, and that is being spent, and it was planned to be spent before we developed the revised budget.
Well, so that would you prefer that we just eliminate those items?
Those items.
Well, the items that we're spending stabilization fund money on? I mean, what are our choices? Our choices are, if we don't want to spend money, you either let people go or you forego expending money on capital items. And then the question is that if you give up the capital items, are you giving up something, or are you just waiting until a future year to spend it? That's why the whole idea of putting off capital expenditures is just an expectation or a hope or a bet that future income will be better than it is now, and that you're going to have the future income, because you either need the capital item or you don't. If you don't need the capital item, then just take it out of your thinking and don't spend on it now, and don't plan on spending on the future, and change your operations however you need to avoid that capital item. But if you're going to need it, then you're only talking about the incidence of money spent, not the amount.
Well, if you want to take, let's take what we argued about and can't come to a conclusion on the mower, 115 grand. That's 2 teachers. So you'd say that we need to buy the mower because the one we have now is worn out and breaking and falling apart. I would agree, it needs to be replaced. But if the alternative to that is losing 2 teachers, now you got yourself a heck of a good moral argument going on.
Yeah, I agree, and I can tell you guys, just in case anybody ever questions it, I'm going to pick the teachers over the mower any day. I'd rather have long grass than uneducated, students. But that's considering that we've already made the adjustments like John talked about earlier, and you talked about, Bob, earlier, about what's the state mandated minimum requirements for student classroom size and curriculum offerings and things like that. Because we can't be too fat in one area if we're being skinny in another, right?
Yeah.
It's
I don't mind at all these kind of analogies or arguments, but one thing we have to go a little deeper, one step deeper, that we're not talking about whether or not to fund a mower. Why would you have a mower? The only reason you have a mower is because you need the grass cut. So what we're talking about is cutting grass. Do you want grass cut or do you not want grass cut? And if you want grass cut, then your next step is, how are you going to do that? What are you going to use? It's similar to saying that, well, we want to have a police force, but we don't think we should be spending money on police cars. Well, the police cars are a way to accomplish same thing you're accomplishing with the police force. It allows them to get around to do the things that you want done. It's not that you want a car, it's that you want the services that gives you. So it's never a conversation about this particular mower versus school teachers. It's a question about the status of your fields versus other possibilities. You're not going to have a sports curriculum without having mowed fields in the schools. So
these are some serious things we're certainly going to have to wrestle with,
yeah.
In the next cycle. There's no doubt,
Yeah.
in my mind, anyways, that we're going to have a very, have to have a very deliberate conversation in the next budget about these things.
Yeah. Okay. Bob, let me see if I can find a little bit different language that expresses that a little better, what I was trying to get at on the school budget.
Okay.
Should I proceed along this path and putting together more?
Yeah. I mean, I like what I see so far.
Okay. Okay. Let me do that then. I'll have some time tomorrow. I'm going to spend some time with Chris and I don't know who else. I'll do that, and I'll have see if we can get Jeremy in touch with with you, Rich, and I'll work on this. And then we have meetings set up for 6:30 tomorrow and 6:30 on Wednesday. And Kathy's going to be sending me the information on how to get to the meeting. So anything else we want to talk about this evening?
Go back one step
Okay.
on meetings. I was looking at a couple of alerts here, one a flash flood and another one a severe thunderstorm warning. And while you were doing that, I missed what you said right before a meeting Thursday at 6:30. Was there one Wednesday tomorrow or not?
We have one tomorrow and Wednesday, each day at 6:30.
Okay, and if I get a link, I'll be here.
Yeah, I haven't gotten the links yet from Kathy.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else we want to talk about tonight?
Yeah, nothing from me, John.
Okay, I thank you for spending the time. And
Thank you, John.
just trying to think, I just keep thinking though that a year from now, we're going to look upon back days like this as being the easy days. Okay, thank you very much. See you. Listen tomorrow night. Bye-bye.
See you tomorrow night, Ken.
Good night.